Bio 20, welcome to the video on the nephron. We are going to start in the world of the function of the nephron. Today, our hope is to understand the role of the nephron within the body. I'm going to know that you are feeling and starting to feel comfortable with this material when you can tell me the role as a nephron as a filter and what structure does the filtering. Also, you can explain the reabsorption and the key substances that are reabsorbed. You can list all the structures that do reabsorption and secretion. You can explain the role of the duct, which will make sense when we go through this, and identify the key places where water is reabsorbed. So these are all of our success criteria today. Hopefully, working with this, you can start checking those boxes off. So we're going to start in the function of the nephron with the three main functions and then the 4 steps of filtration. So the very first step that we have here is filtration. So the nephron is a filter. So the blank is number 1 is a filter. And so what we're talking about, and we don't know what the nephron is yet. We're just talking about it. So hold tight. We're going to write these notes down and then we're going to draw it. So it's going to make a lot more sense once we draw it, but just for now, let's put these notes in. So there's a structure on the nephron called the glomerulus, and it's essentially the very beginning. If you're looking at your notes right now, it's the picture, it's the part that kind of looks like a circular claw holding blood vessels. That's the glomerulus, okay? And its job is to work as a filtering device. So kind of think of like a coffee filter that you would put in a coffee machine. You put your coffee grounds on top and then the water runs through, okay? That's kind of the idea, is you're filtering out things you need and things you don't need. Now, what's really, really, really important to this glomerulus is the things that it's impermeable to, meaning things that can't go through, and things that are permeable, meaning things that can go through. So if we're looking at this picture right here, all of these words, don't worry about these words. We're not going to learn those. But essentially, we're looking at this structure here, and you can see blood flow in and blood flow out. And while it's inside this glomerulus right here, this filtration device, things like proteins, really large molecules, and as you can see, red blood cells, do not get taken into the nephron, okay? Those things are left in the blood. Water, glucose, urea, and really small molecules like ions, like chloride ions, sodium ions, hydrogen ions, they're going to actually be filtered into the nephron. Now, once it's filtered into the nephron, okay, it's actually filtered into a space called the Bowman's capsule, and we refer to the material that is filtered as filtrate. All right, so that's step 1's role of the nephron, is to act as a filter. The second role of the nephron is to be a tubule. Now, tubule, think tube, T-U-B-E, okay, so it's a tube. All right. Now, the key part about this is a tubule can be both for reabsorption and secretion. But for now, we're going to talk about it as a reabsorption device, meaning it absorbs substances that are useful to the body. So what we're talking about is when we are talking about the nephron, which this is the nephron here, this yellow structure here, okay? Reabsorption means it's going to go back to the blood. So everywhere where you see a blue arrow in this diagram right here, and we're going to do a diagram similar to this later, this is showing reabsorption back to the blood. All right. So we have filtered up here. We have taken in that filtrate. We are passing it through the nephron, and there are going to be useful molecules that need to be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream, such as glucose, water, sodium, chloride, potassium. Those are all things that need to go back to the blood at some point. Okay. The other role of the tubule is to be a collecting area, in the sense that when there are stuff in the blood that we don't want, we call that secretion. So secreting from the blood into the tubule. So we can then get things, again, sodium, chloride. It depends where in the structure we are, will depend upon what things are secreted back into the nephron. The other work is a duct, not a duck, a duct. So think of like the eaves troughs on your house, and they collect water and they pass the water down onto the ground. That's a duct, okay? Essentially, the nephron acts as a duct, a holding device that takes the filtrate. So we modify the filtrate. So this picture is showing an example of, like, let's say a water treatment plant. Here is all the stuff coming in from All the toilets you flush. Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of gross stuff that comes down the toilets, right? We have to filter that. You don't want certain big items being filtered into. Okay, so we capture those out, we filter it in, and then we start passing things in and out of the entire nephron. By the time we get to the collecting duct, which is this part here at the end, we now have a modified filtrate, which essentially means that it empties into the collecting duct and we now have something called urine. Okay, so that's kind of the big three major things that happen with the nephron. Again, we haven't learned what structures they are, but just know those three generalized functions of the nephron. You have this picture in your notes, and we're going to go through and we're going to write down the 4 processes of the nephron. So we wrote down the functions. Now we need to understand the processes that happen with these functions. So you can see there's filtering, reabsorption, and secretion and reabsorption. Those are the 3 functions, but now we're going to talk about how that process works. All right. So this is a very shortened version of a nephron. Here you have the glomerulus. This part represents all tubules in the nephron. And then down here is it representing the collecting duct. So the very first thing is the glomerular filtration. That is the first process that has to happen. And it happens here in the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. So we have the glomerular filtration. We're going to create a plasma-like filtrate of the blood. Essentially, we're just creating a filtrate, guys. Just stuff, a liquid that is filled with ions and water and glucose and amino acids. It's got lots of stuff in there, okay? Then what's going to happen is it's going to pass down, and we're going to go through the order of reabsorption, then secretion. Make sure you have these 2 written down in this order because reabsorption happens first. When filtrate gets passed into the tubule, there's a couple key pieces that we don't want to keep. For example, glucose. Glucose is so important to our body. We do not want to secrete it out in our urine. In fact, people who are secreting glucose in their urine, they are actually more likely to suffer from diabetes or have early onset diabetes because that is what glucose in your urine usually means. Your body's not taking glucose into your cells. You should have little to no glucose in your urine. So tubular reabsorption is taking useful substances from that filtrate and returning it to the blood. So reabsorption is all about returning it to the blood. All right. Then we have tubular secretion, which is essentially taking it from the blood back to the nephron. Again, things that our blood doesn't need, such as sodium chloride and all those things. And then very last but not least, our kidneys are going to decide whether we need to reabsorb water back into our blood or we need to keep that water to excrete. And that is water reabsorption, removing water from the filtrate and returning it to the blood. So those are the 4 processes. The 3 functions are filtrate, reabsorption, and water. But the process happens in this order: filtrate, reabsorption, secretion, reabsorption. Okay? So please pause at some point and get this into your notes. Make sure that you are putting them down because we are going to be discussing them tomorrow. Now, I've done a lot of discussion on the nephron, but what is the nephron? Well, the nephron looks a little something like this. So you have a space in your note that says nephron drawing. So you're going to draw this with me. We're going to label it, and that's it for today. Okay. So what we have over here is we have the glomerulus. This is showing all the blood vessels that are all intertwined together that are sitting inside what's called the Bowman's capsule. The Bowman's capsule is attached to this long tube called the proximal tubule. So remember how I said tubule reabsorption, tubule secretion? Here is all of the tubule that exists in the nephron. They all have different names, so we're going to name them. So here we have the dip down. This whole section, the whole part, is called the loop of Henle. You don't need to circle it like I did. I'm just showing you. But underneath, label it the loop of Henle. But each side has its own name. So there's the descending or going down side loop of Henle and the ascending loop of Henle, which is going up. Now we need to distinguish between these two because tomorrow when we talk about tubular reabsorption and secretion, this does different roles, whether it's the descending or ascending. The last piece of the tubule is the distal tubule. So that's all the different types of the tubules. And then on this side, there is our collecting duct. Now, reminding yourself the collecting duct, if we think back to the kidney drawing we did yesterday, where we did the cross section, and I said there is the renal pelvis. This collecting duct empties into the renal pelvis, which empties into the ureter, which empties into the bladder. So what is collected in here is urine, okay? What you have here, and you do not need to draw, well, you should add, I shouldn't say that. You should add, oops, I went too far, guys. You should add this is what is called the renal artery and the renal vein. So you have this in your picture. You have this part already. You have this all labeled. Now we're just going to add on just to underneath here. Okay, so you're going to add on the renal artery and then the renal vein. Okay, reminding yourself arteries bring blood away from the heart. So this is going to be oxygenated and very dense, full of nutrients blood. And this is going to be blood that has been filtered and is going back to the heart to get oxygenated. Okay, so here are the veins and the arteries, your glomerulus, your Bowman's capsule, proximal tubule, descending, ascending loop of Henle, distal, collecting duct. Please make sure you have them all labeled in your notes, and we will talk about reabsorption and secretion later. Have a great day.